Fall in, Polk County. This is today's veteran. Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Drummond, and on behalf of everyone here at the Polk County Office of Veteran Services, thanks for joining us. On this installment of Today's Veterans, we'll highlight some upcoming veterans events aimed at benefiting the local veterans community, and I'll sit down with a piece of living Florida military history, Colonel Charles Bartels. Now stand by for your sit rep, Polk County, and prepare to copy. We here at Today's Veteran are proud to announce the first annual Warriors for Freedom Golf Invitational. Proceeds for the Invitational support the Warriors for Freedom Foundation and the Polk County Purple Heart Memorial. Warriors for Freedom is an organization dedicated to supporting and improving mental, physical, and holistic services for our nation's active military and veterans and their families. Programs and funds support such actions as outdoor activities, wounded warrior scholarships, legal assistance, mental health and wellness services. The tournament tees off on 2 November 2012 at the Cleveland Heights Golf Course in Lakeland and offers an individual and organizational sponsorship opportunities. For more information on sponsorship packages, participation fees, and any other tournament information, please visit www.tinyurl.com/warriorgolf 2012 or feel free to contact the event coordinator, Yadira Holmes, at area code 863-608-0505. We here at the Office of Veteran Services firmly believe that the greatest tool a veteran can have is information. In keeping with this belief, we, in conjunction with Polk State College, Polk Works, and a number of other veteran service organizations are holding a Veterans Information Fair on 5 November 2012. The event is being held from 1000 to 1400 at the Lakeland campus of the college in building LTB 100. In attendance will be representatives from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, the Polk County Office of Veteran Services, Polk Works, Polk State College Financial Services, and a number of other local veteran service organizations. The intent of this fair is to arm as many local veterans and their families as possible with as much information as we can possibly give them. Pre-registration is not required, but for more information, please contact the Polk State College Veteran Advisor, Ken Augusta, at area code 863-297-1010, extension 6360. As I have with the last several episodes of Today's Veteran, I encourage any and all veterans interested in continuing education to take a look at the Veterans Retraining and Assistance Program, or the VRAP. As the only way to apply for this program is via the internet, we have begun providing an open workstation in the lobby of the Frank Smith County Human Services Building. This workstation will let you visit the VA's website, collect more information on VA benefits and the VRAP, and complete the application process. This is simply another way we here at the Office of Veteran Services are working to give veterans the tools they need to build their own future. Since the first conquistadors first laid their eyes on La Florida, the military has played a very pivotal role in shaping the development of this state. With us today, we've got a little piece of military history, Colonel Charles Bartels. Mr. Bartels, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, getting right into the meat and potatoes of this, we asked you to be on the show today because, like I said, you are a little piece of military history right here in Central Florida. Where were you born, sir? Are you a native Floridian? Are you a native son?
I was born in Kentucky and brought into the state at age 4.
So for all intents and purposes, you're a native son.
Absolutely.
Excellent. What was your childhood like growing up here in Central Florida? I'm sure a lot's changed since then.
Tremendous amount of changes have occurred since I really left the state in 1941 to enter the military service.
Okay. So you began your career in 1941. What branch were you in alum of, sir?
I enlisted in the Army Air Corps.
Excellent. Excellent. When you enlisted, were you an enlisted man, or did you take a commission right away? So you went and enlisted?
I began as a private.
Excellent. What made you decide to join?
Many years ago, when we lived at Delray Beach, we had an air meet that occurred annually in Miami. Mm-hmm. And in those days, most of the pilots used the iron compass for mm-hmm. navigation purposes, which was the railroad track. And we lived near the Florida East Coast Railway. And before the air meet in Miami, there would be a lot of traffic overhead. Mm-hmm. All types of airplanes, and I got to see quite a number of varieties. And one was an airship that impressed me an awful lot. The Navy had dirigibles mm-hmm. that carried aircraft aboard. One was named the Macon, USS Macon, and it carried several fighters all aboard. And as it passed over our house, it picked up a fighter and released one. And I was so impressed with that. But aviation had gotten into my blood at mm-hmm. that particular time, and I always wanted to be an aviator. I wanted to be a military aviator, mainly because I was influenced quite a bit by the films mm-hmm. of that day, of the daring flying of biplanes and all of that.
The square chins and
that
the
was
goggles.
The beginning.
When you joined the military, when again you had said you had joined the Army Air Corps, did you become a pilot right away, or what was your actual position with the Air Corps?
No, the procedure at that particular time, if you entered a non-combat or you volunteered for service in a non-combat branch of the Army, mm-hmm. you had to receive your basic training with a combat-type unit. Okay. Which was infantry, cavalry, or field artillery. Mm-hmm. So being a enlistee in the Army Air Corps, I happened to be assigned to the cavalry. And there was no basic training centers in mm-hmm. that age. So I received my initial recruit training in a horse cavalry unit at Fort Benning, Georgia. And the intent was when I learned to be a soldier with these old-time cavalrymen, then I would be transferred to the Army Air Corps and continue my quest mm-hmm. for pilot training. But during that interim period, the war began. And there's no transfers after that mm-hmm. between any unit. I was frozen in position. They took our horses away and we became an armored unit, part of the 2nd Armored Division, which was commanded by General Patton at that time. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of my military experiences, really. I became an armored cavalryman mm-hmm. During the entire duration of war.
Okay. That's actually a great lead-in to my next question, is you were right on the cusp, and I think what a lot of people don't appreciate is that World War II truly forced modernization on the military. It forced a modernization in the sense that we began using aircraft more heavily than we ever had in the past, and it like you had said, they took your horses away and gave you tanks and gave you treaded vehicles. What was it like watching the mechanization of the United States Army? What was it like being part of that transition from the old fighting force into the new?
The old philosophy of World War I was a war of position. Mm-hmm. That's when we had trench warfare. And World War II began, and with the rapid movement, Hitler taught us a lot of lessons on utilization of armor, which is mechanized, and aircraft, on the destructive power that aircraft could render. And that was really the beginning lesson. All the philosophy of battleship warfare and trench warfare became jumped. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of mechanization. And I think the U.S. Army had more vehicles than any place on the face of the earth that they were manufactured within the country. And the number of engines made during that period of time for both vehicles and aircraft is just absolutely phenomenal. It's mind-boggling at the number.
Mm-hmm. Now, you had mentioned that you were in 2nd Armored. In what theater did you serve? Were you European? North Africa?
North Africa was the beginning. And interestingly enough, I became very familiar with the Sherman tank.
Mm-hmm.
And that was going to be, and became our mainstay for the duration of war. And it was also a Lend-Lease item, particularly. The British were desperately in need of more armor and more vehicles. And the heavy fighting was occurring in North Africa at that particular time. So I became an instructor and assigned to the British 8th Army. There's 1,500 of us left the 6th Armored Division and were assigned to various units in the British 8th Army
mm-hmm.
to assist them in the Lend-Lease equipment that we had given them, which is mostly armor and a lot of motor vehicles.
Mm-hmm. So you took on more of an instructor role, teaching the British in North
Right,
Africa.
I was a tank commander at a British tank company.
Mm-hmm.
I was the commander, and I had 4 British subjects, consisted of the rest of the crew, the
mm-hmm.
driver, assistant driver, gunner, and loader, and myself.
So after World War II came to the close, or 2A close, excuse me, there was that small lull, if you will, between World War II and the outbreak of the conflict in Korea. You served in Korea as well, correct?
Right. When the war was over, I went back and reclaimed my so-called rights to
mm-hmm.
enter flight training. And the aviation cadet program resumed in 1947, and I was a member of the first class, which consisted of 41 cadets in the end that graduated in 1948.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the beginning of my flying career. Started at that time.
So you actually got into the cockpit?
I actually had the cockpit, and I enjoyed I think the biplane flying. We had a steerman, which is a open cockpit biplane, and more pilots were trained in that one type of airplane than any other number ever. Mm-hmm. And it was the mainstay of World War II and even before. And that was the most enjoyable airplane that I've ever flown. Particularly, you're alone with the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the wind in your face, and it's an absolute thrill. Mm-hmm. It's an experience that I'll never forget.
That's incredible.
So beautiful.
You flew during Korea then as well?
Oh yes, and my first assignment was in the transport unit, and we engaged in the evacuation of American citizens from China. Mm-hmm. China was involved in a civil war. A lot of Americans scattered throughout China in various places had to be recovered. Mm-hmm. And I was on that particular mission in a 4-engine transport. Okay. And that was really the beginning of becoming a transport pilot.
Now, did you transition from rotor aircraft to, or excuse me, prop aircraft to jet engine during that period?
I entered the jet age. I was assigned to Washington, D.C., mm-hmm. the Special Air Missions Unit. And we had a little executive jet that was jet-powered, the C-140, I think. Yeah, that was it, the Jetstar. Mm-hmm. And that was my first jet experience. And then after that, I went through the turboprop period and back to the jet and mm-hmm. back to the propeller again. It was quite a ride.
It sounds like it.
Quite a change.
Now, in preparing for this interview, you and I talked briefly, and you had made mention of the brush fires between the Korean War and your service in Vietnam.
Right.
There's almost a decade there in which the United States wasn't directly involved in ground combat.
That's right.
But that's not to say there weren't skirmishes around the globe in which the United States participated. Would you tell us just a little bit about where you served and when you served during that period?
Well, I was really based in the U.S., but when we had a brush fire going, it required all the transports that were available. So we had a brush fire occurrence in the Suez Canal. And our mission was really rescuing stranded Egyptian troops in the Sinai Desert that were either lost and out of water. And we were making airdrops of water with a note attached to it on which way to go.
Wow.
For safety. That was the mission of the U.S. Air Force at that particular time. It was under the auspices of the UN.
Okay. Now, I understand you were also in Vietnam to the prior of the outbreak of the war.
That's right.
Again, in an advisory role. Is that correct?
That's correct. I went from Korea. I returned to the USA. I ferried a A-26 Douglas Invader bomber, twin-engine fighter bomber. I ferried that to Saigon. And when I arrived there, I was instructed to continue and make the delivery in Hanoi. And that's where I went, and when I arrived in Hanoi, I got drafted as an instructor of the A-26. We had a U.S. advisory team there that was sort of semi-classified. It was not advertised publicly that we were there or what we were doing. Well, we had loaned the French 75 A-26s and one of our escort carriers from World War II, plus a large number of fighter type. I think it was an F-8 fighter that was carrier based, and I instructed the A-26, and I gave actual instruction in combat, firing the guns and dropping the bombs. Oh, this is how you do it, you know. So I had a man in the right seat. He was a student, and I was the instructor, and I was flying the mission, really. So that was how we played that game at that time.
Now, you know, most of what folks my age know about the Vietnam War comes from either firsthand accounts from parents or even potentially grandparents, or from history books and video and film reel. But being someone who was there before the outbreak of the war, or at least American involvement in the conflict over there, what was it like? What was Vietnam like before a full-scale war had erupted?
The Japanese had occupied it in World War II, and at the end of World War II, hostilities began. I think the Viet Cong really made their first move. Before the Japanese had pulled their troops out of there, the Japanese suppressed this insurrection that was going on with little knowledge of anyone in the outside world. But they really aided the French, who could not militarily reoccupy the country. And then they began, as the French finally gave up with their defeat, shameful defeat at Dien Bien Phu, and then it became a free nation. And as a free nation, it was like a bunch of kids with a new toy. They didn't quite know what to do with it. And, it was like, please, mother, let me do it my way, type of attitude that went on. And they made a tremendous amount of errors, which anyone would do with all this mechanical equipment and the freedom that went along with it.
And the great
It
experiment.
was interesting to watch,
Self-rule.
and a good place to stay out of their way, really.
Okay. Well, after you left Vietnam, how much more time did you spend in uniform prior to retiring?
Let's see, about not too many years. I retired in '68, and I was, at that particular time, the reason for retirement is I was going to be reassigned to Vietnam for the third time. And I said, I've had my full share of it and survived it. So the only way to avoid it is to just politely retire. And that became the end of it. Then I took other jobs of a classified nature.
Did you remain active
later.
in aviation? Even did you become a civilian pilot? Did you still fly?
Yeah, I flew with Pan American
Oh, okay.
and Mid-East Airlines and various other air carriers on special missions.
All right. Well, we could sit here and talk all day. It truly was a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing, not only with myself, but with the audience. So again, Colonel Bartel, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
My name is Jacob Kelbley. I live in Bartow, Florida, and I've lived here since 1980. I'm retired from the United States Air Force. I went into 1952 during the Korean conflict, and I served 20 years, and I was in Korea and Vietnam, and also a recruiting sergeant for 9 years for the Air Force. I've been awarded the Purple Heart from my service in Vietnam in '68 and '69. But I didn't receive it in 2004. Congressman Adam Putnam presented it to me in 2004, but it was due to the sickness and illnesses that came about after I got my VA disability. So I guess that's how the Air Force caught up with me and with the Purple Heart. I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, and went to school in Cincinnati. And then when I got my draft notice for the Army is when I went into the Air Force in 1952. I figured I'd rather sleep between sheets at night instead of in a sleeping bag in a tent. So I decided on the Air Force.
All right. Do you have an interesting story you want to share about your time while you're serving?
Well, let's see. Probably when I was in England was the strangest time I served over in England. My number 3 son was born over there, and we had a party, and I was drinking Scotch whiskey, and everybody started laughing at me, and I couldn't figure out why they were laughing. And here I was broke out. My wife told me I was broke out in big red splotches all over my face and arms. So I stopped drinking Scotch and switched to bourbon, and all the spots went away. So that's about a funny thing. Some of the stories I can't say, I can't talk about it. It's probably X-rated, but it was a lot of good times in the military. I joined it thoroughly, and all 4 of my children were born when I was in the military. And when I was in the military, I was an electronics technician on flight controls and bombing systems and gun firing systems, which were all tied together in electronics on the fighter bombers like F-4s, F-101s. I started out early with the F-86s during Korea.
Name is Thomas C. Seitzinger. I go by Tom or Tommy. Joined the Army in 1960. Took basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Went from there to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for artillery training. And went from there for 4+ wonderful years in Europe. I spent half of that time in Bamberg, Germany, and the other half in Nuremberg, Germany, at the headquarters of the 2nd Armored Cav. Came back to the States, went to Fort Irwin, California for a while, then applied for Officer Candidate School. I spent almost 5 years as an enlisted man, went to officer school, got my commission, Fort Benning, Georgia. Stayed there for one tour as an instructor at officer school, and then went to Vietnam. I was assigned to the 25th Infantry Division in Cu Chi, which is about 60 miles north of Saigon. I was a platoon leader, and then I was the leader of the reconnaissance outfit, and then I was a company commander for a short time. I got pulled in and became the air liaison officer for the battalion. And then one day got involved in an ambush and ended up losing a leg. So they didn't want me anymore. Shipped me back to the States. I spent a year at the Army Specialized Treatment Center Hospital in Fort Gordon, Georgia. I got out of the military. I went back to school under the GI Bill, got my degree in accounting, opened up a tax service. About 2 years later, I decided I hated it. And so I sold my business and moved to Florida, got involved in property management, lived in Tampa for a while. And then one day, my daughter had to come to Winter Haven to take an exam. She was becoming a beautician. So I brought her over, and I fell in love with the place. And it wasn't long after that, I just packed it up and moved it over here. Been here ever since. Been a member of the post here for 22 years. I have held all the offices in the post. Then a few years back, I got involved in politics at the district level and became a district commander, then an area commander, held a few offices at the state level, and ended up being state commander. And that was a job that I would not have not done for $1 million, but you couldn't pay me $5 million to do it again. And that brings us to here we are right now.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Today's Veteran. From everyone here, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'd also like to take this chance to wish every veteran and their family a very happy, very healthy Veterans Day. Be sure to join us here next month. But until then, keep your feet and knees together, Airborne.